Hey everybody, Heartland Hobbyist here today with 5 examples of the Westclox Moonbeam Model S-5J. These clocks were made from 1948 through 1958 here in America and in Canada. The idea behind the Westclox Moonbeam was the flashing light that was to blink and gently wake you up early in the morning or whenever it was time to get up. And if you sleep through the light, after about 3 to 5 minutes or so, a backup buzzer is supposed to sound, telling you it is now time to wake up. And to give you an example of how this works, we're going to turn this around in the back. As you can see, this is a very nice example of the Style 1 Moonbeam. You have a couple of knobs on the back. You have your set alarm knob up here on the top, which will work with this alarm indicator dial in the middle, and then of course your pull alarm to engage or disengage the alarm to the right of the alarm dial. And this knob down here is your time setting knob. Now, to set the alarm, we're going to follow the instructions. It says to turn the knob clockwise. Now you'll notice there's a little red indicator on the back that moves counterclockwise. And it's just going to move. We're going to set this to 7 o'clock or thereabouts, and then we'll go ahead and engage the alarm. And the alarm is now engaged. Now what's supposed to happen, we're going to get close to the alarm time here. What happens is the light is supposed to begin flashing to wake you up gently and easily in the morning without startling you out of bed or waking up the entire house. Now, if you sleep through that alarm, you get a couple of minutes to go, and what will happen before long is an audible buzzer will kick in as a backup. Just like that. When that goes off, now it's really time to get up. That was about 5 or 7 minutes worth there before the buzzer kicks in. And to turn it off, just go in the back here. And just press this lever in, and the alarm is turned off. And that's it, it's time to get up. There is no snooze button on the original Moonbeams. Once you turn the alarm off, it is done for the day. It's time to get up. I would also like to point out that these do not have or recognize AM and PM. So if you're going to bed at, say, 8 o'clock at night, and let's say you set your alarm for 8 o'clock in the morning, it's going to go off. So you want to have at least an hour or so in advance or after the time the alarm is set for it to not go off. And that's just sort of a product of when these clocks were made. Again, no AM or PM, no snooze. But to give you some more information on the back plate here, it is the Moonbeam Model S-5J, 115 volts AC power, 60 cycle 2 watts. And there's your patent information there on the bottom. And then here it says the lamp internally is a 25-watt bayonet-based bulb. And if we turn it over to the bottom, you see the nice brass plate here. They'll have instructions that says to replace bulb, remove 3 screws. Now there's arrows indicating which screws to loosen to remove the case to replace the bulb. Those are the only 3 screws you should ever have to use or mess with. If you loosen the screws inside the plate, you're going to loosen the back plate here or the movement inside, and that you really want to avoid that. So these clocks were available in plain dial and luminous dial. Westclox referred to all their non-luminous dial clocks as plain. And some of the changes that happened over the years, like I said, these clocks were made from 1948 through 1958 in the US and Canada. We'll get into some of the little details and iterations here in just a moment. But the case, let's talk about the case of these clocks for just a minute. The case is made of a butyrate plastic, and the butyrate is known to, which has butyric acid in it, is known to over time develop a little bit of an odor resembling, some have described it as rancid butter, others have described it as slightly spoiled milk. I suppose it could be either one of those. That smell, like I said, developed with age, and it's only noticeable if you get way up close to the clock. It's really not, if it's on your nightstand, you're not going to really notice it at all. At least I never have. I've used, not all of these, but some of these units I've used as my alarm clock, and I don't notice it. But that being said, that is part of the aging process of these clocks. I'd also like to point out, too, most of us today recognize these clocks as being yellow. Well, truth be told, when these were made at Westclox in the 1940s and 50s, the cases were originally white. If you look at all of the Westclox literature, brochures, catalogs of the time, it will describe the case as being a white, translucent plastic case. They were never yellow to begin with. They were white. As you can see, the aging process has turned them yellow, some more than others. Now with the camera light, it's hard to tell, but this early unit over here is not as yellow as these two over here. But then this Canadian one on the end, Canadian-made one on the end, is nowhere near as yellow as these two US-made models. So let's get into some of the changes and the details of Style 1 Moonbeam Model S-5J over the 10-year production cycle that they were made. So let's go back in order over here. This one here, this one's not plugged in. I recently acquired this one. This is a very early, one of the earliest model Moonbeam S-5Js. It does have issues with the motor, so I do need to look at it, take it apart, and see what's going on, but I have it as a visual example. Again, August of 1948 is when Westclox introduced the Moonbeam Model S-5J, and originally it was only available in the plain dial. There was no luminous dial yet. That wouldn't be introduced until a year later. But to give you an example of the very early style Moonbeams, if I turn over the bottom on the brass base, you'll notice the instructions are a little different. This says use no larger than 30-watt bulb, and of course to replace bulb, remove 3 screws. Same as before. Now as you can see here on this unit, the original straight edge screws were replaced with Phillips head at some point in the past, but the original straight edge screws for the movement and backing plate are still there. Well, one is missing, so the movement is a little loose in this particular unit. Again, the case was white originally to begin with. Another indication of a very early Moonbeam is, you'll notice, let's bring this one over here a minute. You'll notice there's 2 rivets right here next to the set knob and where the cord goes in, but there is not any rivets here on this earlier unit. That's because sometime about a year into the production of this model, Westclox added a heat shield for where the flasher mechanism is, to kind of keep the heat from the lamp from getting into the movement and motor. So a design improvement, if you will. But this unit here does not have that. Again, one of the earliest iterations of the Westclox Moonbeam. Another indicator of an earlier Moonbeam, up until 1954, the Westclox Moonbeam had this power interrupter indicator just below the 12 o'clock position. It's supposed to be the same color as the clock face itself as this one is here. If it's red, that indicates that your power was cut off at some point, or you unplugged the clock to do whatever, have it serviced or move furniture around, that sort of thing, and plug it back in. The indicator would stay red until you'd reset it. Now on these earlier models, it'll say on the back plate here, to reset signal, tilt backwards. And you're supposed to tilt the clock backwards and the signal will reset. Again, this unit here is non-operational, so I can't demonstrate This one here is plugged in. As you can see, the power interrupter indicator is the exact same color as the dial, which means it is now fully operational, hasn't lost power recently or anything like that. But if I were to unplug this clock, the little indicator will flip to red, like on the plain dial. So, moving on to this clock here, in 1949, about a year or so into the production, Westclox introduced a luminous variant of the Moonbeam style one, basically taking the same dial design and going, instead of with brown numbers like on the plain dial, brown numbers and hands, they went with a brown face with luminous hands and numbers. So these are, being the age, the lume is radium, so you want to be very careful with these. If you were to take the case off the clock to change the bulb or service the clock, that sort of thing, you want to be very careful with that radium, because these are, that is what the makeup is of the luminescent paint. Not much different than the earlier iteration we just talked about. Same controls on the back. Of course, I mentioned the protector plate for the flasher mechanism was added. And these two right here, the style of dials, this is what would be available from 1948, 1949 for luminous, up until about the middle of 1954. And again, by 49, the bottom plate was already changed. They changed it to 25 watt bulb as indicated on the back instead of 30 watt, and just kept the to replace bulb remove, the 3 screws. In 1954, Westclox dropped the power interrupter indicator from pretty much all of their electric clocks at that point, including the Moonbeam, mainly because the thought was, you know, why do we really need it? Power doesn't go out that often at that point, was the thought, and it was more of a cost-saving measure. So in removing the power interrupter indicator below the 12 o'clock position, it gave Westclox an excuse to redesign the clock face on both the plain and luminous dial. And here in the US, the redesign facilitated a change of the style of numbers were used and the style of hands that were used, giving the clock a little bit more, with the clock dial change, it brought it more in line to what looks more like a 50s clock. You know, as I look at all of them together, these two look very 40s, maybe very early 50s, which of course they are. And the style of dial on these two gives a little bit more of an atomic age look, especially with the arrow-shaped hands and the little chevrons that were added as on the indicators. Originally, my maternal grandfather had one just like this, the luminous dial, with the 1954 to 58 style dial here. This one's probably my favorite. I do like the later iteration of the dial if I were to pick one over the other, but they're all pretty neat clocks. I like them all. And so, of course, with the removal of the power interrupter indicator, those directions are no longer indicated on the back plate. They also changed, just before the change of the dial style, late in the run of the early dials, they changed the feet from rubber to felt underneath. I believe these two, I know this one certainly does because it's one of the first ones, but this one, yes, does have the rubberized feet on the bottom. This particular unit has a movement and motor date from 1951. I have not gotten into this one just yet, but this one should be from 48, very early 49. This one here is from 1956. Again, has the felt feet. The later iteration of the plain dial, which has maroon numbers and hands, and has the dial itself, the dial card is gray with little white polka dots. And then, of course, the luminous dial, instead of being brown like on the earlier style, they went with maroon. Now, the Canadian style moonbeams, or the Westclox Canada, this is a October 1958 movement and motor or actually October 58 movement, May 1958 motor, which is the luminous dial. It has the same hands, maroon face and hands, as the American-made luminous or US-made luminous dial. But you'll notice the numbers are very similar to the earlier iteration of Style 1 Moonbeam made in the US. So up in Canada, they retained the older style numbers. I've yet to come across a plain dial version like this. I'd love to find one, but this is the luminous dial made in Canada. And of course, they kept the West ones, Westclox, LaSalle, Illinois, USA. If you go to the earlier ones, it'll say made by Westclox, LaSalle, Illinois, USA. So, just to give you an idea, like I said, they made these clocks between the US and Canada for about 10 years. All indications give 1957 as the year of discontinuation in the States. The ones in Canada appear in as late as the 1959 Westclox Canada catalog. So, and as you can see, like this one here, got a little bit of a crack on the back, but nothing to get excited about. But it's not as yellowed as some of these other units down the line here. And here's the back plate. The back plate on this one's a little bit, it's got kind of a gray color instead of white, just to kind of give you an idea for comparison. And again, this would have been a white plastic clock to begin with. And of course, the US made ones will have the UL listed Underwriters Laboratories stamp of approval, where the Canadian version will have the SA marking. So, with the exception of, like I said, of that first unit on the far left, the rest of these all work. The light works, the backup buzzer works. Let's go ahead and we'll get you an alarm cycle on each one. I believe the alarm is set for 7 o'clock. And there's our light. Let's go ahead and turn off the camera light for a minute. Now this one, the buzzer causes the light to act a little strangely at times, but nothing too major. See if it does it again. This has something to do with the wiring. This one here, by the way, the ticking that you're hearing is coming from this unit, this 1956 plain dial. Let's go ahead and get an alarm cycle. The blinker on this one is not nearly as rapid as some of these other ones. Kind of give you an idea here. So, whereas this one blinks a little bit faster. This one likes to pause for a little bit. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, that one starts to buzz. And then we demonstrated this one already, but I'll get you a new alarm cycle on it just because. One interesting fact too about these moonbeams, let's talk about the buzzers for just a minute. So the light's supposed to wake you up. The backup buzzer is just that. It is a backup buzzer. What tends to happen on these clocks, as I've found them and others have found them over the years, sometimes you'll get lucky. You'll find one where the buzzer works. This one, the buzzer worked perfectly, or still does, worked perfectly from the time I got it. And I think of these units, that's the only one I can say that about. This one here. This one and this one here, I had to readjust the buzzer armature to engage properly, because what was happening is back here. I don't have the case off of the clock at the moment. I'll have to get a shot of a case off the clock. There's a little armature up here on the top of the motor that's kind of like this, the way my index finger is shaped, and it drops when the trip cam comes around and is supposed to engage the buzzer after, 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how the buzzer flasher interval is set on the clock. And what was happening on the ones that needed to be adjusted, it would drop, but you'd hear a very faint buzzing sound, not even enough for it to, you couldn't hear it more than a foot away from the clock. So they needed to be adjusted. What happens is when the clocks are stored for so many years or not used, or at least the alarm is not used, the buzzer mechanism tends to go stiff and not be audible. My grandfather's clock that was just like this one, my grandma rarely used. When my grandpa passed away, she kept the clock and used it, but rarely used the alarm function, and as a result, the buzzer really didn't work anymore. Of course, at the time, I didn't really know how to fix it, but I was able to take, on the ones here that needed to be fixed, I was able to take a pair of pliers and very gently adjust that buzzer mechanism to work. All right, so here is... Oops, we didn't do... Oh, shoot. Let's try that again. It helps if I pull the alarm. Let's do that. And 7 o'clock. There's that one. Like I said, you'll notice too that the sound of the buzzer on these tends to be unique to the clock itself, and it could be because of the age. Like I say, these clocks are upwards of 70 years old and older. Like this one here, that's got its buzzer sound, which is kind of unique to that clock. Slightly different than the first one, and then of course this one. And a lot of that has to do with how the buzzer plate is set in the clock and how it rests and it hits the motor mechanism or the magnetic strip. Here's the Canadian-made Moonbeam. I can't talk today. Canadian-made Moonbeam S-5J. Let's go ahead and give you an alarm cycle on this one. As I recall, the flasher on this one is not very rapid either. It'll blink a couple of times and then it will sit solid for probably 15 or 20 seconds before it decides to go off. And there's the buzzer on that one. Again, it sounds a little bit different than the rest of them. Again, a really neat clock, made from 1948 through 1957 in the US and through late 1958 up in Canada. The Westclox Moonbeam Model S-5J. These clocks, this style of clock was reintroduced in 2001 by the then owners of Westclox, known as Sultan. And they had added a snooze button on the top. They had changed, they went away from luminous radium dial, obviously, but by then luminous radium paint had been discontinued by the early 70s by most manufacturers. So what they went to was more of a plain dial with plainer style numbers than what you see here. And it had a yellowish orange backlit dial, which is kind of neat. But that being said, with all the changes and updates, these do not have snooze buttons. But the newer ones are made a little bit lighter weight. They don't have the metal back plate. Everything's plastic, much lighter weight, cheaper plastic at that. And the reviews on the remakes have not been very positive over the years. And I believe even nowadays they've updated them again. The 2001 to about 2010 design remake, the cases remain pretty faithful to the original, but in 2010, the now current owners of the Westclox name slightly modified the look of the case, and they went to an LED bulb inside instead of an incandescent, and they'd added like a USB port to charge your phone, among other updates. But I've heard the reviews on those are not as great either. So if you're looking for an original Westclox Moonbeam and not the remake, you want to make sure that they say Westclox on the dial, not Big Ben, not even Moonbeam. The original or real Moonbeams will only say Moonbeam on the back metal plate with the Moonbeam Model S-5J. That, and also too, the originals will have the sweep seconds hand. They will not have the quartz movement, which I much prefer the sweep seconds hand to the quartz movement. Alright, well this video ran a lot longer than I'd planned, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what to look for when you're looking for a Style 1 Westclox Moonbeam Model S-5J. And as we talked about some of the changes over the years through the production cycle of what to look for, which style you might prefer over the other. So, all right, I thank you for your time, and you all have a good day.